back to the Hill Update. I'm your host, Dean Allison. There's a growing debate in Ottawa that strikes at the heart of democratic accountability, and it's this. Should politicians be allowed to switch parties and, in doing so, help prop up or even create a majority government? We've now seen floor crossing used as not just an individual political decision, but as a mechanism that can fundamentally alter the balance of power in Parliament. Voters cast their ballots based on a party, a platform, and a set of promises. When an MP crosses the floor, that original mandate gets rewritten without voters ever having to say. And when those decisions contribute to forming and strengthening a majority government, the implications become even more serious. Is that still democracy as voters intended? Or is that a loophole that allows governments to consolidate power without earning it at the ballot box? So today, we're asking a straightforward question. Should floor crossers be required to face a by-election before changing up the makeup of a government? Let's have a look at this clip.
Following the news of Marilyn Gladu moving to the Liberal Party this week, Pierre Poilievre commented at his press conference in Richmond, BC yesterday.
I feel badly for Ms. Gladu's constituents, the strong majority of whom voted for our Conservative vision of an affordable and safe Canada. And she said that she was going to stand up for the Conservative values of affordability and safety. Now, she has joined the most costly Liberal government in Canadian history, going back on her word. She has said that members of Parliament that flip parties after they were elected promising to be in a different one should be forced to run in a by-election. My personal opinion is that when a member of Parliament goes back on the word that they made to their constituents and switches parties, that constituents should be able to petition to throw them out and have a by-election. In a democracy, the people are in charge. Their tool of decision-making is the ballot box and the vote. Waiters, welders, seniors, single moms, small business people should know that their votes count. They should know that when they vote for a party in a community, that the resulting elected MP will serve in that party and push forward that vision. Otherwise, people lose their votes.
Is Liberal strategist Ashley Waters. Ashley, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right, guess your thoughts. I mean, we started with a few floor crossers, and we've had the by-election, so now the Liberals have a full-on majority. Just your thoughts in terms of, should that be allowed in forming a majority? I mean, maybe strengthening the party. What are your thoughts?
I think the conversations around our electoral decisions are good ones right now in the public realm, because even though Pierre Poilievre might be making these comments now, he had the opportunity in 2011 to change that, because there was Bill C-306. And so that was put forward by an NDP member, and there was prominent Conservative members like Harper, Poilievre, some Bloc members that actually didn't allow that to go into a second reading. So now I understand it's historic, and so the terms might be a little bit different, but just with our voting system, when someone is elected, they're elected as an individual to represent their own constituents. And I think in this particular case, when we see this majority and how it's shifted so much, there is way more attention that was ever paid now, because like you said, it's formed a majority where that's never happened. So I can understand the frustration of voters, especially in the Conservative Party and the NDP Party, because we didn't only see, floor crossers from just Conservatives, we've also seen it from NDP. But I think that's why it's such a crucial moment right now for Mark Carney and his government, because you're seeing it more of a Mulroney government, or you're like a Chrétien era, where there's so many different ideologies that are brought to the table, and with the major projects that need to happen. I think someone like Marilyn that crossed, that's why, because, Sarnia and Lambton, to extract petroleum in particular, that's one of the major projects that need to be pushed through. So even though there's frustration, I can see how we ended up here.
So I guess my concern is that I think there's probably some enticement. You never see members leaving to go to opposition parties that don't have power. So I guess time will tell when we see what's going on, what type of enticements may have been given. I'm not suggesting gobs of cash, but are you putting stuff in my riding? Does it mean a position? What kind of things does it matter? But I would agree with you that people do not leave normally to go to oppositions. It's
Right.
always to strengthen government parties. So when we come back from break, we're going to discuss trade, which has also been big on the table right now when we come back from break. Welcome back to the Hill Update. Canada's economic relationship with the United States is not just important, it's foundational. Roughly 3/4 of our exports go south of the border. Millions of Canadian jobs depend on this relationship. That's why it's raising eyebrows when we hear two completely different stories coming out of Ottawa and Washington. On one hand, the Liberal government says trade discussions are ongoing and productive. On the other, the U.S. ambassador has publicly stated there hasn't been meaningful talks in over 6 months. So what is it? Because if there's a disconnect or worse, a breakdown, Canadians deserve to know. At a time when tariffs, supply chains, and economic uncertainty are front and center, standing still isn't a strategy. Today, we'll dig into whether Canada is actively defending its economic interest or quietly falling behind with the most important trading partner. Let's start with the big question. How significant is this move potentially? Let's have a look at this clip.
Do you feel as though there is something happening intentionally to get us to the point where we are right now? Or is it actually just a really intense negotiation and it's normal for this to kind of be the rhetoric and fallout?
No, actually, it's not an intense negotiation. Okay, there really have been no serious negotiations since October of last year. So you've got September, October, November, December, January, February, March. You've got almost, is that right? November, December, January, February, March.
You missed April, but it's fine because we're in it.
Yeah. So we're, it's roughly 6 months of no serious negotiations. And the review is supposed to be complete by July 1. Mm-hmm. That leaves us with 9 or 10 weeks. This is, I was in politics. If you are giving the keynote address at your party's convention, these statements have been gone over intensely for various audiences. Okay, what's this going to do to the 4,000 people that are in the convention hall today? What's the impact going to be? What's the impact going to be to the Liberal constituency by and large? What's the impact going to be for voters?
So what's your thoughts? I mean, we got the ambassador saying, listen, we really haven't had meaningful thoughts or discussions. We got the Liberals coming out and saying, hey, we are working on some stuff. There's also a list of irritants, but we're not going to have time to deal with that today. Maybe we'll deal with that another day. Give me your thoughts on that.
I think this is more just political spin on the ambassador's part because there are talks that are happening. We know Dominic LeBlanc has been there. We know we've sent so many other representatives or conservative representatives have gone with, that personal connection to J.D. Vance or any of these other people that have tried to move the needle. And right now, because we're coming up to that deadline, we know that, Mexico seems to be leading the charge, kind of making their own deals, but we're going to have some kind of negotiation because they are our largest trading partner. Yes, we want to have other, middle powers that are helping us, supporting us, and utilizing them. But at the end of the day, these talks do have to happen. I don't think they can be so public just because it's so volatile with the administration. And as we saw, especially last weekend with Trump staying up till 4 a.m., posting things, on Truth Social. And those are the kind of irritants that we don't want to have. So it's not like we can make it really public at this point in time. Maybe some of those negotiations, I think by meeting the defense, targets, like things like that maybe those were benchmarks that we were supposed to get in order to even have a seat at that table with the negotiations. Those things could be pushing the needle in the right direction. So I think for him to say that nothing's happened for the last 6 months is not a fair assessment.
And as I'm going to go by what the ambassador said, you're right. It's he said, right? In this case, he's saying that there's a group of Mexican politicians that have been down there working on these irritants. They're in Washington. They're working to try and reduce that list, get the list of irritants. In part of the longer clip, he says there's a list of irritants as well on the Canada-U.S. side, and the Canadians have really not even attempted to look at this list. And then he goes on to say that we're supposed to be starting to look at the USMCA or CUSMA, whatever we want to call it, starting on July 1st. So we're actually running out of time when it comes to that. And so you see a list of irritants that don't seem to be addressed at all. And we could see that. And maybe we'll do another show where we could actually put that list out and talk about that. When you start to realize, okay, if we're not dealing with the irritants, then how are we actually getting to the actual trade deal? So I know we could spend more time talking about this here, but I think we'll leave it here for this. And then let's look at the next segment of what's been going on with government hirings across all boards. We'll come back from break. Welcome back to the Hill Update. Over the past decade, the federal government has added roughly 950,000 public sector jobs. That's not a marginal increase. That's a massive expansion of government. So the obvious question is, who's paying for it? Because every new position ultimately comes back to taxpayers, many of whom are already feeling the squeezed by higher costs, higher taxes, and slower economic growth. At the same time, we're not seeing the same level of growth in the private sector, the part of the economy that actually generates wealth, drives innovation, and funds public services in the first place. So what's the long-term plan here? Is this about better services for Canadians, or is the government growing faster than the economy that can support it? Today, we'll break down what this shift means and whether it's sustainable. Have a look at this clip.
Between 2015 and 2024, Canada added just shy of 1 million public sector jobs, according to a report from the Fraser Institute. This growth in the public sector during the period outpaced job gains in the private sector. Let's get more from Jason Childs, the author of this report and a professor of economics at the University of Regina. Professor, thanks for joining us. So tell us, is there cause for concern here? I mean, the population was growing.
The population was growing, but again, we're seeing increased dependence on the public sector for employment rather than the private sector. And it's really important to remember the public sector does not fund itself. So we're leaning on general private sector taxpayers harder than we were in the past.
What areas in particular? I mean, was it provincial or federal? Did you do a breakdown on that level?
So this work doesn't include that. There is another piece coming out that does include our focus primarily on provincial. The growth is across both. We know that the federal Treasury Civil Service grew by almost 200,000. I don't have that number in front of me right now, but it grew significantly over the same period. Massive growth in there as well. But provincial and municipal governments as well have been growing at the same time.
Okay, so we got over 1 million jobs in the last 10 years.
Right.
The public sector, we got private sector, some companies leaving to go to other places, US being one of them. Just your thoughts on, is this sustainable over the long run?
Well, again, with population growth, there's that need, right, for public sector. So it's not just, I think, willy-nilly. You need people that are going to go ahead and process your passports or any of the other government services that they provide. And I think we saw that spike during, the pandemic, because there was so many more assistance or different government programs that were created. So that also created jobs for those people to look at what financial needs, maybe small businesses and different things that for support. So there was an actual need for them. I don't think just to fire a bunch of public servants makes sense just because there's like a dotted line just to do it. If there's efficiencies and there's certain bloat, like they're referring to in this clip, but not just for its own sake, right? Like if it makes sense and there's a need for those people and those positions to help with the general public, then I'm all for those positions being created. But again, if it's redundant because there's two people that are basically doing the same job, then I would say, you have to really look at that and scale back.
Well, and we got to balance it off, because I think that, we know private sector, you and I, we pay our taxes. Right. That's what funds the civil service and funds the public sector. But we also see that, I think government's made it tougher, and we see the top 1%, top 5%, where like 40% of these people are actually men and women are leaving and taking their companies and investing in the U.S., which I think also create a problem if you don't have the wealth creators that actually create jobs and pay the bills. Right. If we can't entice them. I mean, that's a bigger argument too. But I think if the government's going to, continue to grow in size, I don't personally believe it should be outpacing the private sector, because they're the ones that are paying the bills.
Right, and I think that's why people were maybe not necessarily confused, but weren't expecting Prime Minister Carney to come out and say, okay, this is how many public servants are going to be offered packages or retirement packages to try to scale that back, because that wouldn't have been something we would have saw from the Trudeau government, for instance, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think there's a bigger question here. Are we doing enough with red tape and regulations? Are we making it easier for businesses to be started? Are we making it easier for job creators to be able to start and grow a business? Or are we constantly creating red tape? Are we creating issues for them so they think, you know what, it's so hard to do business in Canada.
Right.
Maybe I'll just move my business across. You know, we saw their numbers where Canadians were starting more business in the U.S., and there's a whole bunch of things that back those things that I think really make it difficult in the long term. Once again, more topics we can delve into in a bigger way. So we're going to break right now, and we'll come back and finish off the last segment. Welcome back to the Hill Update. High-speed rail sounds like a great idea. Modern infrastructure, faster travel, economic development. But as always, the devil's in the details, and especially in the price tag. The proposed Alto high-speed rail project is now being discussed in terms that could cost in excess of $90 billion. That's not a small investment. That's a generational financial commitment. And Canadians have seen this movie before. Large-scale government infrastructure projects that start with optimism and end with massive cost overruns. So, before we get too far down the track, we have to ask, is this a nation-building project or a potential boondoggle? Can it deliver real economic value, or will taxpayers be left carrying the cost for decades? Today, we'll take a closer look at whether high-speed rail is the future of transportation or a very expensive gamble. Have a look at this clip.
Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, Rideau Lakes.
The law is clear that ministers must not use their position to further the personal interests of their family members, but the finance minister is championing the multi-billion-dollar Alto project where his partner is a vice president. Now, it was the finance minister who told the prime minister that he was concerned about a conflict of interest because of that relationship and said that he needed to recuse himself, and Canadians agree. The problem is that's not what he did. Now, the Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics wants to review the matter, have the minister come to clear the air. Instead, we have a Liberal filibuster. So will the minister end the filibuster and come to committee?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
You want to know who's championing high-speed rail in Canada? 173 Liberal MPs on this side of the House who are going to build major nation-building projects, including high-speed rail, a major project for national unity, a major project for mobility in our country, a project that will favor the building trades, men and women, steel, aluminum, lumber. We're going to put people to work using Canadian materials, and we're going to move that train as fast as we can, Mr. Speaker.
All right, so the problem, the problem is we got a $90 billion project. So Liberals are saying this could be nation building. Conservatives are saying, okay, this is a bit of a problem. And by the way, this leads to potential conflicts like the one discussed on the clips. Love your thoughts. I mean, $90 billion is a big price tag, especially for only from Montreal to Ottawa.
So again, with these kind of projects, it shouldn't be sticker shock for most people, because if it's ports or if it's rail or if it's airlines, like any of those things are going to cost, substantial amount of money. I think it comes back to, again, I feel like that's a little bit of a political spin, even with that clip, because it was the Conservatives that really wanted that high-speed rail in the first place. And now when you look at a decade later, there's reasons why they think it's a bad decision. At the same time, we need to push our economy along. We need to be able to have people that can commute in a reliable way. And so if that's through this means and it's one of those nation building projects, now that there is a majority, maybe we can push these things through. Maybe it wouldn't take so long, but time will only tell.
So I don't believe we've ever wanted the high-speed rail. We've wanted to increase frequency with Via Rail and some of these things between Ottawa and Toronto. I think one of the challenges we're hearing from not just for Conservatives, but from other stakeholders as well, is that you got a high cost of appropriating people's lands. Right at the end of the day, they've done it in Pickering, they've done it in Mirabel, in Montreal, around the two airports. So that's never an easy thing. And then the thought is that, something that starts off at 90 billion today, probably by the time it gets done, is going to be nowhere close.
Yeah, and I agree. Like I know that these numbers are put out in a certain way, and at the same time, they want some private investment. Like I know with some of these projects, they'll talk about it and hope that private investors come through. But at the same time, if we're not going to start doing these kinds of projects and doing them fulsomely, like I feel like in Ottawa in particular, you can't really rely on the rail system at this point in time, or even in Toronto when we're trying to say, oh, it's like you said, delays. And I think people just want to see it get done. So if they're saying, let's put this forward to make lives easier and to get that transportation and that mode of transportation across the finish line, like, let's just see it happen.
Yeah, and I guess the other thing they're concerned about is they do believe there's already lots of options with via rail and flights, et cetera, and a short distance. Ashley, thanks for joining me today
on
the News Forum, and we'll see you next week. So here we are, lots going on in Ottawa. We got things like major projects like Alto. We've got trade agreements, and we've got that relationship with the U.S. that continues to be very important and something that we also need to make sure we do a better job on. Thanks for joining me on the News Forum.